So this term, participatory culture, comes from this media culture theorist, Henry Jenkins, who you've all read something by. And there's another one of those blog entries that you might find useful, this why participatory culture is not Web 2.0. I would just glance at that. The examples are very outdated, like most of them from 2009, but I'm going to reference that. There's also a very short video. There's a 1-minute video that, but even before you get started, you might find that you want to check this out and watch this and read through. So I have a couple quotes and categories from 3 different readings from a couple of different years here, so I can talk a bit more about getting a sense of participatory culture, what it is we are looking at, and what we're going to avoid, or what we're not going to spend time analyzing, researching, talking about. So keeping in mind from last week, there's the secondary goal of ours from this whole project of learning genre, discourse, community, ways of writing about culture, how that is changing along with technology. So being, again, this question of the connection of technology and culture, and I think that digital media, participatory culture, network culture indicates that, but a lot of this needs to be unpacked, because certainly the writing about culture is a big part of this, and we can have a question in the back of our minds too of maybe what is getting circulated, the way that writing and communication, and not just writing, but even video, reviews and blogs and all sorts of commentary, the multimedia forms that is taking, perhaps that is connected reciprocally with the forms of culture that are arising. That's all secondary. Again, like I said, we'll look at that in a primary sense of how we want to communicate and add to this, how we're adding to the discourse about, the writing about culture with our wiki. So we'll table that for this week. And our primary focus, though, is the culture forms themselves. So the culture forms, the digital media, and so start thinking about what interests you. So I'll give a few examples. These topics here are very general. Don't think of them so generally as in this very abstract way. When you read these, it's really useful to keep in mind an example. So I'll help you with that, and you'll see what I mean, I think. So from this book, Confronting the Challenges of Participatory Culture, that Jenkins is quoting in a few of those blog entries, he and a few other authors define this very broadly, but in some ways that they were observing in the network conditions. So just like with Project One, remember all that we worked on and talked about for that, technology, network rhetoric being part technological, part social. So if you have that in mind, I think you'll see how that connects here as far as the cultural forms. So low barriers to artistic expression. Think about the fact that you and I can post videos and music to YouTube, but we can't post our content to television or the radio. Civic engagement, this will be for a whole other discussion. I've taught an entire course, actually, new media and civic engagement, but for right now, let's just focus on maybe not even artistic expression, but low barriers to creation and expression. Strong support for creating and sharing creations with others. Informal mentorship. So think about this informal learning. There's this phrase from Joanna Portman Daly she calls informal learning through, quote, public pedagogy. Think about all the ways that we learn from each other in networked situations online. Now, as far as believing that our contributions matter, this is more clearly a social aspect than the culture form itself. As you can see here, a degree of social connection with one another. So for me, this describes more about the communities of creation, of culture, creation, and sharing. Don't think that we need to look for this so narrowly, and you'll see what I mean here. So later in the book, they note these other aspects. So affiliations that are maintained through online communities, and it might even just be social interaction, not community where it's working on something mutual interest, but just the sharing of these creative forms and expressions. So right here, this is really what I want to call your attention to. Not so much the communal social aspects, but the production of the new cultural forms using digital media. Sampling, modding, fan videos, fan fiction, creating zines, mashups. Some of this could be collaborative, but this is not exclusive, right? It's not like, well, I don't see collaboration, so it's not participatory culture, right? There's a potential for collaboration, and I'll make an important distinction about the difference between Web 2.0 as a platform. So we were looking at the media ecology, the media studies perspective earlier, thinking about, okay, these platforms for communication enable collaboration, and they enable circulations. The platforms themselves are not the culture forms. So think like I just said about YouTube, right? YouTube enables circulation, but it's not, doesn't have to circulate. You can just post a video there and maybe nothing happens. And that's where this is really useful, as I was talking about community, thinking about this term affinity spaces. Maybe you're part of a forum, a community, a lot of people are posting their work and getting feedback, or maybe you're just working on something yourself. So this is from 2009, and I'll show a few other ones from, so 2010, there's an article from Carter and Arroyo, and they actually edited this, not just an article, but a journal issue, and they grouped the articles into 4 series, and they're cluster types of scholarship. So think of this as something that we might do. We might start to arrange topically, or just think about, okay, I'm going to look at this from a certain angle. So what these articles did in the enculturation issue is investigate new cultural practices appearing as a result of YouTube. It was a special issue on YouTube. We'll just say networking technology and digital media. So the participatory communities that it makes possible. So there are articles that want just focusing on the act of archive, infrastructure, production, performance. This is useful. You might have this in mind too, maybe more or less consciously or directly, but it's good to start thinking in terms of approach. What are you interested in? As a few of you already started noting in your discussion posts. Now, here is yet another approach to it, and this we might find even more productive. So the Participatory Cultures Handbook from 2012, they looked at consensus cultures, creative cultures, and discussion cultures. I would say that for our wiki, we're going to find many, many examples and worth analyzing, discussing, framing, connecting with this label creative cultures. So participants create, share, comment. There is remix, sampling, recombinatory, mashup, praxis, creative techniques. Sorry, when I'm saying praxis, so like the creative techniques, right? Fan culture is pretty narrow there, but I mean, so a lot of fans might just read about it and post blog comments without necessarily making fan fiction themselves. But this is really useful for us to think of that distinction, not just consumer and producer, rather, so passionate about creativity and topics that spur those passions. Join a culture and start adding to it. So that's what I have here. And this was just really a draft form that I came up with, trying to think of a sequence. So this idea of something is striking your passion, interest, right, and you spend a lot of time reading about it, viewing it, thinking about it, talking about it, right, that meta language, not just the television show itself, but everything around it, reading about maybe how it's made, reading reviews, talking with people about it, seeing other people's takes on it. That is fairly passive, right? Maybe a little bit, we might think it's more involved than just watching the show, but so think about this as the potential to switch from a passive role to a more active role, right? If I say engage, like comment on a discussion thread on a review site, the AV Club, or I share articles, or I share a supercut video, that's a fairly active role, but it's not yet a participation in the way of a creative role. But I'm saying that there are many very interesting forms, again, just thinking, okay, connection of technology and culture that go hand in hand. People are creating. So you might read about it and be really interested. Let's say I read a lot of reviews or stream a lot of music, create a lot of playlists. That could be the start to switching into a creative activity, where like maybe I'm just creating a lot of playlists as keeping track of songs that I like, but that very technological media component, or the feature of the media that allows me to compile all of that, it also turns into a storehouse for creating something like a remix or a mashup. And that's what I have here, this idea of this continuum, where something is more or less creative. So I mentioned earlier about Web 2.0 as a platform, and Jenkins' blog post about that, it's not too long if you want to check it out, but I don't think it's so essential that we had to make it mandatory reading. But the key thing being that this Web 2.0 platform, so something like YouTube, or here I have Goodreads, so someone can see what I'm reading, what I share, what books I've rated. That's not necessarily adding to or adding any creative culture there. The 2.0 platform, something like YouTube, SoundCloud, Goodreads, and there are new gaming platforms where you can create your own video games. So Web 2.0, just think of it as there's user-created content, but something like a list on Goodreads is not the same as creating a new story for you to read. I'll show you another example, one that I really like. So with television shows, is Netflix a Web 2.0 application? Not necessarily, right? I don't have too many interactions with other users of that. Maybe YouTube, people posting their reviews, comments, perhaps that's a little bit more Web 2.0 involved. But something like posting a review, anyone can create a blog and be a music blogger, be a TV blogger, right? Is that necessarily participatory culture? There's one step further, because there are also folks who are making supercuts or creating GIFs from scenes of the TV show. There's also one blogger, I'll show you a quick example of how someone uses Tumblr. So this site, Slaughterhouse 902.0, I've been following this for a few years. Maris Kreisman, she reads a ton, she also watches a lot of television. So here she has a simple template, a screenshot from a television show paired with a quote. And sometimes the literary quotes are fairly obscure. Sometimes the television scenes are fairly obscure. Here's a couple recognizable ones. I don't think that's a spoiler if you haven't seen the Game of Thrones finale. But you see what she's doing here with this quote with the still. Now, did she make her own fan fiction? Not necessarily. So that was just one example that I was giving. But this goes a little further. This is more artistic than something like a review of Orange is the New Black. What I view this as, Maris Kreisman is using Orange is the New Black, just like Anna Karenina, as raw materials for creating something that she did here. And then just in the kind of mashup style, right? Because the relationship is left implicit with this captioning. It's closer to what we see with image macros and memes and the logic of the web, or something like a mashup song. It's not explaining it. It's not like she's using this quote from Murakami to explain Game of Thrones. That's why I think it's more an aesthetic expression here. So if Maris Kreisman were in the class, she would say, okay, I read a lot of books. I want to see what are we doing with literature now in Web 2.0. We have all these. We have Tumblr. What happens when we put literature or online? A lot of that turns into fan fiction. So you might think about that. If there's something that really interests you about music or film, what is happening with, what is the participatory culture form of film? Supercuts takes a lot of skill. You watch a lot of movies and you then can create these films that, it's not like making your own film, but it's definitely more creative than writing a review or doing a video review of a film or a TV show. Likewise, someone switching from making a walkthrough video to then making their own video games, perhaps. So that's one approach. The other approach could be, and this is what I'm thinking for the wiki, it would be important that we have a mix of this. Our key question, relationship of technology and American culture, digital culture. Part of that might mean, what is the culture of network technology? And not that we want to go down the rabbit hole of just some obscure, like all the most obscure internet genres of culture, but to think about, okay, what are the popular forms and genres that people are not only circulating, clicking share, clicking like, but that are using themselves. So something like memes. And if you're new to this, if you've not spent any time, don't worry, just click around and you'll see what I'm referring to here. Just click, this is a good site, know your meme. So something like this we want to keep in mind for the wiki, because it's already out there. We don't need to make a catalog of all of these really popular memes. What we might do is identify genres and talk about them in using some of those key terms from the course, how we can better understand participatory culture as the connection of digital network technology and contemporary culture forms that are connected totally with social practices. So how we convey our identity, thinking about Project One, how we communicate with each other with animated GIFs, what's going on there? That's what I'm thinking you can explain better. But as I was saying here, just to switch back to this about some of the topics of the wiki entries, that could be a key question of what is the culture of network technology that we have up to speed with the circulation, the speed of culture, like I had on the Tumblr here, Slaughterhouse. So, that was very timely that she posted this. I don't know how long it took to make. I don't know if she has a whole lot of quotes, just like with mashups. You need hundreds of songs and then you hear certain seconds that fit together. So there's definitely time involved, but the timeliness, why do certain memes or forms catch on? And then why do some stuff seems to come out of nowhere and bring back past forms into the present? I think that's something that we could account for in the wiki. So the key part to this that I've been mentioning, so just like we are creating our wiki, inviting contributions, we have from the start network audience, but also active roles involved. People who are going to see this are going to share it on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr. So they're going to share it, our wiki, but they're also going to add to it. And that's what I mean by that participation, contribution. One key point that I want to isolate and have you keep in mind is that we're thinking of this from the start as being networked. That's something to keep in mind with these participatory culture forms. So here's the key distinction: not just created in isolation. So demo tracks of music that you create, that you leave on your hard drive. No, this is something that is created, you maybe learn from, model on, create, and share networked. So you're always thinking, yeah, this is going somewhere. This is going to be out there. People are going to interact with this. Even in less, quote, cultural forms. If you're thinking like, all right, well, is an animated GIF culture? But keep that in mind, the social network rhetoric, where that is absolutely, like, why would we have this animated GIF just for ourselves, right? It's always with that social purpose involved. So I don't mean to over-determine it in the terms of Project One, but that's just something, a good way of grasping that most of these, if not all of these forms, have the network conditions in mind inherently at the start. So it's not just, internet art, where, okay, I made something and I posted it, but it is networked culture. It's one of a part. And that's the other thing, too, is that we could look at how this fits. So start maybe thinking in terms of genres, media forms, multimedia, adapting, updating, modifying. Think about, okay, how are people using television, as I had here? She's using this kind of as the materials for creating, right? Or how are we modifying? So like modifying music, using songs, modifying them to create new music in the sense of a remix or mashup, even updating forms. What is happening to platform games put out on the network? What is happening to photography or fine arts? How do we update them to be culture for the network? So the technology involved, but also the social networking involved in that. But the main thing, just to sum this all up, for participatory culture, think in terms of the shift from passive roles to active roles of creating. So even the slightly more active, like I'm sharing, I'm compiling, I'm curating, I'm making playlists, I'm commenting, that might all be just preparation. I can shift, I can go even further to become a creator. And maybe it's part of a community, the way that Jenkins and all of them are talking about up here, but maybe it's not determined by that necessarily. Maybe it's maybe that's just a side effect of that. So this is all to say that when you see these, do not think that we are beholden to the quote experts here just because they were writing about this the past few years. What I want to emphasize again about our method is we want to use what is helpful, what is generative, what's going to spark ideas and create new ways of looking at this when we create our wiki pages, not to be evaluated by the experts, but to have a use value, to make a wiki that people are going to want to consult, maybe just of interest, but then add to it as well. They could learn from us the way that we are learning from both scholars and networked writing, people who we don't even know their names, who are posting writing and video on the web. So that's a kind of a long-winded overview here, but just to sum that up about that progression of from passive to active roles, that participatory culture is that creative expression and sharing using network technology. So hopefully that helps, keeping this in mind. And like I said, there's a few other linked points you might read. You might even just looking at the table of contents in something like the Participatory Cultures Handbook or DIY Media, looking at the chapter headings and to see what they're focusing on. That might help for you to get an idea like, oh, no, okay, I totally get what we are focusing on if you're worried about what we mean by participatory culture.